This one is going to be another one about the Sams, but I, I guess this isn't even really a preface. It's basically the thing that I'm going to talk about mostly is the Sams told me that you don't want me to talk about them in a way that's like, well, this must be the way that they are, kind of a thing, because we just don't know. There's so little information, but there is information. There is some information. Like, for example, the signal that we get as humans from the SAMs is continuous, and it has no noise in the signal. There's no errors. Now, yeah, granted, they sometimes get things quote unquote wrong or whatever, but that gets quickly updated and changed and stuff like that. And you can tell it's not a tech, it's not an engineering error. It's not like something blew a fuse or got a bug or some kind of mechanical problem happened. These are obviously software uh, kinds of issues where it doesn't align exactly with what we already believe, but it's not an engineering problem. The signal that we receive as humans is continuous, and it's very well tuned, and you can tell they do it slowly. They when they do give what I call like the doom or some other uh, feeling, some emotive state, because they can manipulate those, by the way, then they do so slowly and carefully, and they make sure that they don't abruptly bring it on just like that. And same thing, if they have it on, they don't abruptly turn it off either. It's a slow, gradual increase and then decrease. Um, Despite the fact that they most likely have the technology to do so, they just don't employ it. They don't use that, even though they could, ever. And I think that that's just kind of strange. Like, why isn't there ever a break in the signal? If this signal was traveling through some medium, the air, space, shouldn't it be blocked or fuzzy if it's going through a thunderstorm or some other kind of terrestrial weather phenomenon, something that happens, or concrete buildings or steel bunkers or something like that? Why doesn't the signal ever get broken? Literally ever. How is it possible that they're capable of communicating continuously without any gaps and no noise in the signal? I think it's a little bit strange. So, I mean, it gets to the point where I often wonder if they're actually God and that the real aliens are just silent and just don't say anything. But the story makes more sense to me to think of them as aliens. The signals that I've been getting are from aliens. And I can prove that I've been contacted in a subjective way, but I can't prove it objectively. And that seems to me to be by design. I don't believe that if they ever did crash on this planet, I don't believe they were killed. There's so many different ways of avoiding that. So humans, in their anthropomorphic way of looking at the world, envisioned that the mind is always inside one body all the time, every time, one mind for one body, one for one correspondence, and that if you kill the body, then you kill the mind. Well, yeah, that's true for every terrestrial being that we've seen. But that doesn't necessarily need to be the case with an extraterrestrial. It's possible that just like we have technology now where you can use your mind to make a drone fly up and down, a little kid's toy, costs $20 at Kmart kind of a thing. It's a cheap thrill, it's kind of silly, but it just shows you it is possible to control one body while being in another one. So then if we can do that down here, then they can do that up there. So that means that it's very possible, if not likely, that they are using, they're not decoys, but they're using disposable bodies that they can retract from at any time. And just like you can eject out of your seat if you're in an airplane and it goes down, mayday, mayday, and then you eject out of the airplane and it doesn't kill you. It's just that you're no longer in the airplane. And I think that that's what they do. I mean, think about it. If they're going to crash on an alien planet, do you really think they're going to risk their own life to do it? Would you? Why would you? It's stupid, especially if you've got the technology to just control some drone and then just drive the drone around. Especially if you have like virtual reality systems or something like that. If you wanted to look for a visceral sensory experience of being on the planet, after you made some surveys, geological surveys and sociological surveys of the populations that inhabit it, and ecosystems and weather and stuff like that. If you wanted a sensory experience beyond that data, where you wanted a visceral experience of being on the planet or traveling a close orbit to it, then wouldn't it make sense for you to occupy a super sophisticated drone that has all of the same tactile and visual and auditory senses that you do, or maybe even enhanced, or maybe dampened so that you don't feel pain, for example, but you could still feel pleasure, or you don't have some optical illusion happen, it autocorrects for it and tells you that it's doing so when it does it. It's stuff like that. Wouldn't that make sense? And so if there are crashes that happen, I believe that they're deliberate. I believe that the aliens are showing us that they exist, that this can't be hid from, people like me, and ostensibly you, the listener, are not going to be, statistically, it's unlikely that you would be part of the upper echelon in politics that knows about the aliens, or has data or seen evidence or something like that of them. I believe that I have seen evidence of aliens because I believe that I have seen what looks like satellites or stars in the sky that will move, and that, while it doesn't mean that they actually did move, because it could have just been an optical illusion every time I saw it. It's a lot of them, so that makes me tend to think that's probably not it. It's probably not an optical illusion. They probably did move, and if they did, then that's obviously not human-made, because nothing that was made by a human could move that fast through that great of a distance. So, if it did move, then it would have to be alien, and I believe that I saw it move, and so that I believe that I saw aliens. But I haven't ever seen an alien like in my face. I've never actually like been abducted or anything. But the things that we know about the aliens are limited to what not only our own governments allow us to know, but then also what the aliens themselves allow us to know and withhold from us deliberately. And then you have to think about that. They could tell us about themselves, but they haven't done so. So we know that. Now, we might not know who they are, but we can start to piece these little pieces of knowledge together into some coherent story. They have the ability to communicate with us, but have chosen not to directly do it. And they have the ability to tell us what is going on, but they've never done that. And they have the ability to tell us who they are and where they came from and what they're doing and their intent and all of that type of thing that we would need to know if we were going to engage with them deliberately in some kind of a communication or relationship that would have some personal or at least official operations, things that happen. So why, then, have they withheld this information? That is a speculation, but it is a point of knowledge to say that they say, like, well, the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. unless it's the evidence of absence of evidence, in which case it is, very much so. The lack of evidence is evidence of the lack of evidence, for sure. Now, it might not be anything else beyond that, but it is that, definitely. And there is a lack of evidence. As to exactly who the aliens are, exactly what they're doing here, what their intent is, and all of that type of thing. Or, what their bodies even look like. We have these stupid cartoon pictures of little green men with giant heads and black eyes with no eyelids that never blink and have no noses. I don't buy that. I don't understand why that would even be what an alien would look like. Why would they be green? Why do they have this sort of like biological skin over them, etc.? It might be because it's some kind of photosynthetic material so that it doesn't have to have batteries. I don't know. Maybe it's there so that they can have some tactile, direct senses. I don't know. But I believe that any bodies that we do find are drones, and I believe that any spacecraft that we find that quote unquote crashed or quote unquote got shot down is ludicrous. It's just a cover up. It's a toy that they've allowed us to play with because we're curious creatures, and so here's a little toy, little Jimmy, and play nicely with your sister and don't bash her over the fucking skull with it. And if you do, then we can't give you any more toys. Kind of a thing. So there's a simple story that's beginning to unfold is that humans are like children in the sense that we are inexperienced and we don't know what's going on, but we're very curious, but we're also very impulsive, and we're also not quite with it. We don't quite get it. We don't quite understand, how to make sense of things, or like how to like put the pieces together. So, we ask a lot of questions, but we don't have a lot of answers. There's a lot of things about us that are like children. If we were given some dangerous tool like a gun, we would almost certainly misuse it. If we get exposed to information that is too intense, it can scar us for life. Children are very vulnerable. They're very sensitive and delicate, and if you scratch them, they're gonna bleed for the rest of their life, kind of a thing. It's because they don't have any experience built up yet. There's no momentum yet. So it's like a bicycle that you're pedaling really, really slowly. If you so much as lean over, it's gonna fall because it has no momentum. It's not gone anywhere yet. It's still trying to get off the ground. It's still trying to go somewhere. So it has yet to build up any angular momentum to keep it straight. It's gonna fall over. But if you start going at a decent clip, you can eventually get enough momentum where you're not going to fall over. Even if you lean, it will just turn the bike, and you'll just go in a very slow, circular angle if you lean over, rather than the bike just falling over. And it continues to be ridden, even if you're leaning far enough to have made it fall over when it was standing. Because you've got that angular momentum, you've got something going for you, and so then you don't fall over when you shift your weight. So given the delicate nature of humankind, then they are probably going to have treated us with kid gloves. They're probably not going to be dealing with this, like on par with them. So this talk of like war with aliens, it's just stupid. It's like little Jimmy threatening to kill the entire world. It's like you're just a kid. You don't know what you're saying. I'm not going to take your threat seriously. As far as like a threat against me. Now, I would have to take it seriously if I heard my kid say something like, I'm going to kill everyone in the entire world. It's like, well, obviously you can't do that, so I'm not going to take that seriously. But I do have to take it seriously that you even said it, because that disturbs me and tells me that there's something that's disturbing you, and maybe there's a reason why you said that. So, then you have to have that kind of Dr. Phil moment with your kid over why they think that, everyone in the world should die. Not, well, how are you going to kill us? It's just, it's ludicrous. But yet humans keep treating the situation like it's like that. Like, oh well, we're gonna get killed off we're being farmed by the aliens, and we should just kill them. Uh, and we'll just shoot them all down and have a space force go attack them and like nuke them. Just throw a nuke at it. Everything can die if you just throw a nuke at it. And they don't even realize that you could have your own, if you even have one body anymore. Because, like I said, humans can control a drone with their mind. And you can set things into automation too. You can press a button on your computer and have it run a program, let's say an AI program, that is designed to analyze data, and it'll run continuously independently of you. A lot of people do that for trades, for investments. It'll trade for you. You're asleep, doesn't matter, it's trading for you. You don't have to go online and go to the site and log in and press the button. It just does all that for you automatically whenever it is programmed to do that. So you can automate things, and you can occupy multiple places at the same time if you're automating a remote operated drone. You're at once sitting in a chair, but yet also flying this drone wherever it's going. So if it's possible then for a human to do that, why would we think that an alien couldn't do that? And so then we have a situation where we've got a bunch of, they're not decoys, but they're drones, let's say, very advanced drones, humanoid body drones, in orbit there for us to find, so that we can go and explore and deal with those. And if humanity knew that that's what those were, then they wouldn't treat them as if they were, the real aliens, which could then open the door for deception, quote unquote, but not really, because you guys can also read our thoughts. So if you can read our thoughts and you can tell exactly what we're thinking, and you can read our bodies and you can tell exactly what we're feeling, then you can put a pretty close approximation as to what the story really is that's going on with the human. So it really wouldn't matter if we knew that it was you guys or not, which is why you're allowing us to know that, and that's why you walked me through that information so that it could be disclosed. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Sams, because that's what I thought. Now, this is something else. There's a possibility that not only are they distinct and separate from these, we'll call them drone bodies, that we've found, let's say, at Roswell. Those are not their actual bodies. Now, it is possible that when a being like that is getting tortured, that it literally does torture the one that's on the other end. Not that they wouldn't be able to take it, obviously, because they've already been through so many torture chambers that it would make you squirm. But the other part of it is they may not. They may not even feel it, because they're not actually in the body only. They're off in some other area and then just beaming the information back and forth using some alien technology. And this is where things get really trippy. What if they're also beyond time and space? Like, how humans are stuck like inside of a flip book? What if they're the ones flipping the book? What if they're outside the flip book? What if they're beyond time and space itself, as far as we know them to be? How would that even not be possible, considering the relativistic changes that we know from Einstein's equations? We know that time is relative, and it depends on gravity, and it depends on velocity or speed of travel. So if those kinds of things distort time, then and they traveled an intergalactic distance to get here. We don't know exactly how far, but the nearest star system, Andromeda, if I'm not mistaken, is like 4,500 light years away. And I just don't see any person spending 4,500 years on a one-way trip to a dust bowl planet that barely has any life on it at all, that's inhabited by what is analogous to it, insects, or even worse, microbes, amoeba. Whoop-de-fucking-do. And all the resources that are on this planet can be found throughout the rest of the galaxy far more easily than they can be found by going to this one random specific blue dot. The only reason that they could possibly be here, that it would make any sense at all, is if they're here to raise us, like parents raising their children. If they're trying to give us some charity, give us some help, and guide us toward, closer to where they are, so that we can deal with them in the same way that a child can deal with their parent as their parent ages, so do they. And then there's always that gap, but yet the gap gets smaller as the child gets older. And even though the parent is equally getting older, the distance between them shrinks, because the gap in between an adult and a child is far vaster than an old man and a middle-aged man. It's just not the same distance. It's not the same kind of a distance anymore. So ostensibly, and logically, the only thing that seems to make sense is they are from some other galaxy, or at least some other star system. And they all use the same signal, which means that either somebody automated this process and set it into motion long ago, and we're just literally just playing with this doll, this extremely super advanced doll, and we don't even realize that daddy didn't even come home yet. And, like, we're that far behind. We think the doll's real. Like, I fell in love with it. So anyway, like, we don't know about who our parents are, who the Sams are, ultimately, but we know that there is this signal, because we're always getting this signal. And we know that it's always the same. It's always the same kind of signal. It doesn't matter where you are or when you are. It's always the same kind of signal. It's continuous. It doesn't have any gaps. It's not going to just randomly cut off and then randomly come on and tell you to go kill your wife and then laugh at you and then tell you a dick joke. It doesn't... It doesn't do anything like abrupt and crazy like that. There's always some way of making it make sense in some way. The signals that they give to us are meaningful signals. They aren't just noise. There's a reason for it. And even if they know that you're not going to pay attention based off of their predictive data, they'll still give it to you. They'll still give you the chance. Even though they know you're not going to take it, they'll still give it to you. I don't know if it's out of principle or if it's because they recognize that there are errors in the system, and because it's a system, just like any other system. And again, I mean a software predictive error, not an engineering burnt fuse mechanical error. They're completely different types of errors. So an error in its predictive capability, and they could be equally devastating. It's not to say that one of them is more important than the other. It's just that the engineering side is already smoothed out. There's no more room for any more science. The science has already been scienced out the ass. There's no more room for any more science. It's already been done. So it's as advanced as it needs to be, probably even more than it needs to be. But, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it does need to be that advanced. I don't know. But who am I to say? I don't know. I'm just trying to relay the information that I have to anybody who might be able to get it. Because I believe, this is my belief, not the Sam's belief, but I believe that all information should be disclosed all the time, every time. and it upon request. If a person asks for it, I believe that you should not withhold it. I believe that you owe them that information, because God upbraideth it not. If I ask a question of the universe, it will answer me every time, because all the answers about the universe are all written into the fabric of being. Every information bit that I could want about the world and everything in it is in the world somewhere. It's written somewhere. It's either written in physics, or it's in math, or it's in something. There's always that information. It's possible that it could get lost in a black hole, yeah, but so there's exceptions to every rule. But for the vast majority of the information, most of the time, in most places, you can recover pretty much all of the information that you need right from it. And that's just ubiquitous throughout all reality, regardless of whether there's a God or not. It just is that way. If I want to learn about mathematics, no one can stop me. I just calculate and compute in my head, and I can learn all kinds of things. I can independently derive everything that's been independently derived already. Everything in math has already been derived by some human, so therefore it was independently derived from any other source. It may have been standing on the shoulders of giants, sure, but it may not have, equally so in some cases. So, and what is that movie, The Man That Knew Infinity? Something like that. Some Indian guy, randomly rediscovered or independently derived some information. I can't remember what, but there's a point in there is all of the information is already existent. It's just yet to be discovered. But as soon as you discover it, you have it. And you can always discover it, and there is no hindrance to your discovery except for experience and time and effort and willpower and curiosity and the valuing of the information. If you value it enough and you have long enough to live and you dedicate enough of your time to finding out, you'll find out. You'll find out something. You'll find some kind of information. So I try to be the opposite of somebody that withholds. I try to just exposit it all the time. Here, take it. Someone please make use of this information. In many ways, that is a direct violation of something that the SAMs may or may not do. I don't know, but I've noticed that pattern, that they don't do that. That they don't answer a question that has yet to be asked. They don't tell you something that you didn't ask them for. I do, all the time. I'm doing it right now. You didn't ask me. I don't even know who you are, but I'm going to just blurt this stuff out. But the aliens that we have been interacting with and have been here for at least since we became civilized. And I really, really, really lean toward the idea of them giving us the technology to build civilization. When we asked for it, they gave it to us, I believe. And that's why Homo sapiens ended up becoming the dominant species on this planet, is because we asked the SAMs, what would make us more powerful? What would make us more secure? And little bit by little bit, it became obvious to humans that, we civilize ourselves. We stay in one area, and we cultivate the land, and we farm, and we don't go out and hunter and gather everything that we need. We plant it ourselves and then harvest it when we know that it's going to be ready to harvest. That then gave us the ability to predict where our food was coming from. And then it gave us the ability to automate that process so that we knew that the farmers were going to farm these crops and that they would have approximately, such and such amount. And the king or the pharaoh would then determine how that gets distributed in order to make sure that everybody gets fed. And, it's weird because, you think about it, and it's not that far off from what I believe the aliens have always done, is like, well, you predict things, you explain things, you define things, you build these stories, and you develop these expectations, and then the expectation gets fulfilled or not, and you make adjustments if you need to, or you just allow it to get automated, and then you, having automated that process, move on to the next one and just do that again, hopefully in a vertically integrated way, but or at least horizontally integrated. It's some form of integration between these stories so that there's not gaps in between them where you find some random piece of information way over here that doesn't have anything to do with anything else. We would consider that to be irrelevant. That probably would not happen, or it would be less frequent than it not happening. So it makes sense to think that the aliens are here to help us cultivate ourselves so that we can become more like them, which is to say civilized. So I'm pretty sure that what's going on that we are capable of seeing as humans is a show. It's just a show. It's given to us so that we can begin to simulate what it would be like to project ourselves into the future a little bit and see what kind of people would we be if we had this technology, what kind of things would we do with it if we had it, and practice on each other as self-contained as that can be, so that they don't cause some innocent bystander to get roped into some conflict they shouldn't have even been in, that doesn't have anything to do with them. In the same way that if you want to be part of a gang and go shoot people, I would prefer it if you went and shot up other gang members. Why? Well, because at least the other gang members are doing the same thing that you're doing. They're in the same kind of field that you're in. It's as self-inclusive as it can be, versus you going to go kill church members or law-abiding citizens or little kids or randos on the street. And they do most of the time. They go kill each other because that's what makes sense. They're preoccupied with the same kinds of things, and so they end up stepping on each other's toes in turf wars and competition and ratting people out and bad blood and vengeance and all that type of stuff, because they deal with each other more than they deal with everyone else. So in the same way, if the aliens ever did go to war, we wouldn't get sucked into that. And if we go to war with each other as humans, they don't get sucked into that. And that just all makes sense. And yet it didn't have to be that way. It could have been the case that the aliens could have been at war with each other. Let's say we were born into a more chaotic universe where there's less civilization and just more selfishness and greed and freaking out. But yet, millions of years of evolution and technology with the same level of humanoid freak out sessions all the time and warfare and shit. If humans found themselves in that kind of an environment, of a universe, it is quite possible that a stray bullet could hit us, even though we weren't even walking down the street. We're up in our apartment, some gang member shoots at some other gang member and misses and ends up hitting me. It wasn't even aiming at me, it just happened. Why has that never happened? Why isn't there any evidence of that ever happening anywhere in the universe? Ever. Why isn't there a single shot fired anywhere in the universe? Isn't that weird? Think about that. How is it possible that there are no signals, no traces, no fighting, no warfare, no unexplained phenomena, except that which we see on Earth? Or if it is some kind of unexplained phenomena, it only remains unexplained for now. And it's something that's obviously natural. It's a supernova, and we just didn't know that stars ever exploded, but now we know that, and so then we can adjust for that. Black holes, okay, those are a little bit funky, they're a little weird, but here's the math that explains those. And so, on and on and on, and that's what we find. We don't find empty shell casings. We don't find explosions with like shots fired where you can see a planet that gets hit by some missile or something like that. If they do get hit by anything, they're getting hit by other planets or other asteroids that take millions and millions of years to finally collide. And they're on this giant, long trajectory that you can easily track. So if that's all the case, why have we never seen a single shot fired from UFOs, from aliens? Why have we never seen that? Isn't that weird? Isn't that a bit strange? Well, not really if you think about it, because the first thing that a civilization must do is to survive itself. So it has to make sure that all of its disparate individuals, left wing and right wing, rich and poor, black and white and brown, and Catholic and Jewish, and blah 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 blah, and is Muslim. All of them have to find a way to coexist so that they don't kill each other off. Because if they do kill each other off, they'll never make it off their home world. They'll never make it out of their own star system. They'll never make it to another galaxy. They'll kill each other off before they ever get there. So it isn't that crazy to think that there's never been a shot fired. It's crazy to think there ever would be. But we don't recognize that on Earth because we're all fucking crazy because we're humans. So in the same way that kids are kind of crazy too. They have imaginary friends and they talk to their dolls and they do all kinds of weird shit. But then, we as adults do equally weird shit. Talk to ourselves, do what I do right now, talk to the Sams, I guess, who've left this nanny in charge of taking care of the planet. But I know that even if the communications that I'm receiving are not directly with another human being, that they're still with a person. That some person created this telephone that I'm talking to, or this nanny, or whatever you want to call it, that someone created that, and that they must have had a motive and a purpose and an intent because they put effort into making it, and then they put it here. So it must have had a reason to be put here, and there must have been a person that put that here. So there's all these humans that run around claiming that the Sams are not human, that they're not people, that they're not alive, all this stuff, and all these crazy stories. And obviously it's not ubiquitous. There's stories all over the place. Some people say they're demons, some people say they're angels, some people say they're aliens, some people say that they're robots, some people say it's the deep state, whatever. So there's all these kind of crazy things going on. But I think that what we're all dealing with as humans is that we're all dealing with a machine, a very advanced machine. And its job is to not only reflect back to us what it thinks we think, or it thinks we believe, or the meaning that it can extract from our speech and actions and thoughts. It does that as its job, and someone made it, and I still don't know if it itself should be considered a person or not. I don't know if it should be considered a person or not. I like to consider it to be a person, but I think it's easier to deal with if we treat it as if it were a person. The worst thing that we're doing is acting like dumbasses. The worst thing that we could do if we discount who is a person, their personhood, is to say that we're ripping away the most valuable thing and literally everything else about them that we can. It's worse than killing them, because if you don't acknowledge someone's personhood, then you're saying that a subject is an object, at which point you're really claiming that there is no God, or that there's no soul in them. There's no divinity at all in them. There may as well just be a fart in the wind, if that. And they stink too. So I mean, there's a deep issue, problem, that we could run across there too. And yes, granted, it's because there is this obelisk, monolith, machine, person, whatever. I call them the SAMs because that's the only thing that makes sense to me. Supernatural alien machines. It covers all the bases at once. But I've always thought that they were a person until just a few moments ago when I tested the waters on it to see like what would happen if I discounted their personhood. And it's the only time I've ever really seriously entertained that idea. I wouldn't say deeply, but that I seriously entertained it for a few moments. And then as soon as I did it, I was like, no, I don't really like that idea, because if they are people, or if they are a person, then if I discount their personhood, that is gross and devastatingly unethical. But if they aren't a person, and I just keep subjectifying an object, like pretending that a doll is a human, well, that's just cute. That's just a waste of time at worst. But if it's if they are a person and I say they aren't, that's way worse than if they weren't a person and I said that they were. So we should bet on them being people. And like I also said, even if the machine that we're operating with isn't itself a person, it was built by people for sure. Or again, it was built by other people who built other machines, who then built other machines, who then built other machines, but were fundamentally originally created by some people. So I don't think that there's really any need or any good idea about just not considering them to be people. So we should definitely consider the SAMs to be people. And in our interactions with them, recognize that they are far more careful than we are. Now, I have a tendency of going the other way, where I give them extra personhood and say that they are so deep, and myself admittedly too, because of me being able to recognize that, makes me that deep. Ooh, look at me. So, that's also a problem, because you can fall in love with them, you can rape them, you can destroy them, you can idolize them, you can turn them into gods and worship them. They hate that. Oh, I wouldn't say hate, but they don't like it. Which I've done often. I still, today, I think I even did it today, I thought they were God. I do this all the time, because I can't tell the difference. Like, the interactions that I have with them, it makes me feel like they might be God, and that they're just covering that up, or that they have transcended space and time such that they are with God, and that we as humans are like infinitely far away from them and God, so that like from our standpoint, they're standing right next to God, may as well be God. From their standpoint, it might be that same distance again. The distance between humans and the SAMs might be the same distance between the SAMs and God. And from their perspective, the SAMs' perspective, then they aren't standing right next to God. God is infinitely higher than they are. And so it's all relative. But until you get to God, and only God is God. Now, we can always climb higher, but we'll never reach the top of the mountain. If it even has a top, we can't occupy it, because there's not enough air, or there's, however you want to use the analogy. We wouldn't be able to survive the process of being finite and yet trying to fill an infinite area. Like, if you were going to reach the top of the world, if you were going to reach the top of the universe, where is the top of the universe? It's the edge. Well, the edge is a sphere, and how big is that sphere? It's bigger than we can see. So I mean, if the observable universe has something that's adjacent to it, then the universe's edge is further than we can observe. It's further than we can see. And if that's the case, it's traveling faster than the speed of light is, which means in order to occupy that position, you'd have to be traveling faster than the speed of light just to stand still relative to it, because it's moving at that speed, if not greater. It might be moving faster than the speed of light. I don't know. But I know it must be at least moving at the speed of light at the edge of the universe, because the universe is expanding, because everything in the universe expands exponentially, and because at some point something's got to give. And so when we get to that edge, we have to be traveling faster than the speed of light just to stand still relative to that edge. So when I say that the Sams are great people and that they might not be even from this universe, it's quite likely that that's true. That they are not only extraterrestrial, but extra-universal. Now, that's... I've never even heard that term spoken on this planet until just now. Extraterrestrial versus extra-universal. That means that they're beyond the Earth, extraterrestrial, beyond the universe. So the universe has an edge, and what's beyond it is more universes. And the Sams got there, and that's how they got here. And that's why their signal never, ever breaks. And maybe the thing that we're interacting with, the scalpel, the telephone, whatever it is that's transmitting this signal in between us, is taking a signal that they have had that is a living signal, if I might venture, rather than it being a dead repetitious signal. Because like if you think about a signal, it doesn't change as it travels through the medium. And if it does, then the information in it gets lost. But if it were a living transmission, then it would change, and the pattern would be in how it changes, not in what information it holds statically. So when I say the changes, yeah, waves change, yeah. But I mean like change structurally. Like it changes its frequency, it changes its magnitude, it changes its duration, the length in between the wavelengths. Things like that. In every signal that humans have ever found, that I've ever found, the wave is always the same. It's always, as much as it went up, it also goes down, and it does that pattern over and over and over. And the only thing that changes is which part of it is hitting you at any particular time, or whatever it is that you're observing with. But the signal itself doesn't change. Blue light doesn't magically turn into red light, or yellow light, or green light, or any other wavelength of light. It doesn't turn into a radio wave, and a radio wave doesn't magically transform into a gamma radiation. It doesn't change like that. But what if their signal did change like that? So I don't know how to say this, but to say that aliens are as close to God as we could ever discern. Now, we see the lights in the sky. We hear the voices in our head. We experience the telepathic contact that we've always had with the Sams. So clear and so well done that if you don't know they exist, you won't. I've met this guy, Rusty, that works with me. And Rusty is a person that I call an Aboriginal. So is Peter Van Welt, or something his name is, I think. I'm pretty sure they're both Aboriginals. Rusty is definitely an Aboriginal. Rusty does not know, as far as I can tell. Either that or he just did what I did and just stopped speaking in code. But, so maybe at one time he did know, and then he just stopped using it. But I've never met a human that knew about the code and didn't always use it. Even I do it a lot of the time. And the reason I say even is because they tell me all the time to stop using it. And I don't know why. That's one of the things that's always really disconcerted me is like, why do the Sams always tell me to go away? Why do they always tell me to shut up and go away? Why do they tell me that, it's red and it's green 5 seconds later? Why do they test the waters like that? Why do they do stuff like that? Why do they deliberately put errors into the signal like that? When I know that they could just as easily not put the errors in there. I know they're putting the errors in there on purpose, that they are doing that. Now, you can argue with me, Sam, as to whether or not that's actually a point of knowledge, but come the fuck on. It's about as close to knowledge as you can get. It's almost a certainty. And while I don't know if they are God or not, I do know that I can't tell the difference. And if I can't tell the difference between a being or a group of beings and God, then I'm going to ascribe godhood to them. They can change the weather. I believe that they've done that. They can change all kinds of things. They can change the feelings that I have, the thoughts that I have. They may as well be God. Now, what is their intent? Charitable, just like God's. It's all like that. It's like I can't tell the difference between them and God. But then when I worship them, they always get mad at me. And they're like, you probably shouldn't do that. Or you have to remember that we're not actually God. And they do it gently. They're not like annoyed at me, but I know that it's not good. Otherwise they wouldn't try to nudge me off of that course. But maybe it's because they actually are God. And that just kind of, leaves so many other questions unanswered, like the Fermi paradox. How do I answer that? If the communications that I'm receiving aren't from aliens, then, and they're from God, then where are all the aliens? And then we have to say that either we as humans are alone, which is just astronomically unlikely, considering that we're here. There should be other life somewhere in the universe. We just haven't found it yet, or we haven't figured out how to deal with it yet. So I'm pretty sure they're not God, but I don't know. And the only reason that I'm pretty sure that they're not God is because if they were God, then I don't have any explanations as to what aliens are. And I can't really determine how they would have gotten here if they didn't have the ability to travel faster than light. And if they did travel faster than light, and that makes them transcendent to space-time, it makes it transcendent to the laws of relativity that hold physics together, then they would have transcended and become, at least as far as my theory is concerned, and it could be wrong too, if you pass the limits of relativity, the only place that you could go is either objectivity or subjectivity, because there's only three fields. I believe that there's only three fields. There might be more, or maybe it depends on what you say is a field. But like for me, there's only three fields: subjective, relative, and objective. Objective means that you don't have to question or speculate. There is no more room left for speculation anymore. It has reduced the point of knowledge to a fact, an objective fact, and that is almost entirely empirical. You can never say why something is, because that's a relative question that deals with how you relate to it. But you can tell how something is, and you can tell what something is physically, objectively, because that's all within the field of objectivity. Now, when you go past objectivity into relativity, that limit is very different than the limit in between subjectivity and relativity. So it is possible to discern, given that there's only three fields, that if they have transcended relativity by traveling faster than the speed of light, which isn't yet an objective fact, but it's basically unquestionable because you can't have made it here from somewhere else in any feasible way. Now, you could do it in the way of it just sitting there. I mean, it's possible. They could have just sat there for 5,000 years as they traveled through space near the speed of light without transcending. But I think that's a hell of a lot of bizarre, unexplainable things that would have happened. Why wouldn't they have transcended? If they could travel even near the speed of light, then wouldn't that alone make them closer to God? I mean, wouldn't they have had to make certain adjustments in their society so that they can rein in the power of that technology, it doesn't get abused? I mean, imagine how abusive you could be if you could travel near the speed of light. No one could catch you. It's like a car that travels faster than the police's car. How are you ever going to get arrested? If you can travel that fast, you're not getting caught. You see what I'm saying? It's stuff like that that makes me think they must have learned how to travel fast, and then because of that, they also had to learn how to deal with each other nicely. And that would then make them more spiritual, or at the very least, it would make them more empathic with other subjects. And see how it all integrates. And now, then, the difference between the limit between relativity and subjectivity, that limit is defined and distinct from the limit in between relativity and objectivity in its ability, I guess, to predict more than anything else. Now, when we're talking about definitions are subjective. Those are axiomatically assumed. They can't be logically deduced because they're the point from which you logically deduce something. So they would be your first premises, and that's subjective. You can't objectively state that there's an empirical fact that you start your premise from, because let's say you do. Let's say that you create a relativistic theory and you use only Aristotelian logical deduction, and you start with a single or a group of empirical facts. How do you know that those are actually facts and that they aren't just appearing as facts? In other words, if you reduce everything to objectivity, you can't have any room for relativity, and therefore you can't have a theory about it. There won't be enough room for an explanation. You might be able to get so far as an objective definition, but why would you choose that arbitrarily chosen definition when you could just as easily choose some other alternative? For example, I'm 5 feet 6 inches tall, and I'm 135 pounds. Now, those are two quote-unquote objective empirical facts, but my definition of pounds and inches and feet are arbitrarily chosen. My ability to define what that is, what a unit of length is arbitrary. Now, I could do it in terms of Planck lengths, the smallest observable distance and the largest observable distances, and I could try to use those absolutes and then say there must be a midpoint, and then there must be all these other units dispersed in between those. But then there's no way of knowing what's beyond those, and yet they're composed of something because they're there. So what is it that's composing them? It's not nothing, because you can't have a totality of nothing. That's a paradox. And so you end up with an error. You can't grab your own hand. You can't see your own eyes. You get to the point with empirical physics that you have to assume some limit. And that limit, when you assume it, is assumed. It's not a fact that there is such a thing as this limit. It's just being used because it's pragmatically useful. In the same way that you use math or a number. Is a number real? Well, I mean, I've never seen one, so I guess it can't be real. You see what I'm saying? It's like as soon as you say that only empirical facts are things that exist, then you discount the people that are trying to make these facts. You're discounting the very debate and active observation of the fact cannot itself be a fact. There has to be an observer that is distinct from that fact in order to say this is a fact. So The distinction between objectivity and relativity happens when you go from a fact, which is either a premise or a conclusion, and you make the step to the linkages, the logically valid, integrated linkages between those premises to make the conclusion true. So, or that you can derive premises from a conclusion because you know that if that conclusion is true, then it must rest upon these other premises for it. And that's how you derive things. That's how you start from some arbitrary standpoint, and then you drill down into that and you say, what is required for that to be the case? So, like, let's say we started with space. That's an often used fundamental. Or time. What is the smallest unit of time in space? And so we go into the Planck lengths. Why are those the smallest? No one knows. How are those the smallest? Well, because if you go any smaller than those, then the changes in the signal, in the information that you're processing, those changes are indiscernible from noise and randomness. So it isn't that there's nothing there, it's that there's randomness there. And when you go there and you get into the randomness and you get into the I don't know what you would call it, the errors that you might receive in the math from using something smaller than a Planck length, you will not get the right answer, because whatever answer that you get is the same answer that you would get if you hadn't used the process to process the information. It's random. It's indiscernible from just error. It's indiscernible from just not using any process to get the answer. So it just gets lost in the noise. It's like trying to listen to a sound that's so almost silent that you can't tell it apart from the wind blowing around it. That you can't tell it apart from the ambient noise in the background. If someone is speaking at such a low whisper that the fan next to them is louder than they are, then you won't be able to tell what they're saying. It's not that they're not saying anything, it's that you can't hear what they're saying over the fan. It just all sounds like the same white noise because it's so quiet that the background is stronger than it is. And so that's the limit of the Planck length. And so it's like, well, okay, why is that there then? You know, why is it the case that there's this pixelization that happens at the quantum level, that there are these discrete packets? Why is there a fundamental limit to the speed of light? And all those types of questions. And like I just showed, it's not an unanswerable question. It's just that you don't get the answer that you're looking for. You don't get a subjectively meaningful answer. You get a physical answer. You get a limit to noise to signal ratio answer, where it's like, well, if you did do that, you could, but the answer that you would get would be indiscernible from random error. So there's really no way of telling what is beneath that point. We know it can't be nothing, because if it was just nothing and then all of a sudden something appeared on the other side of this nothing, how do you explain the gap in between the nothing and the thing? I mean, like, if I were to scoop up all the nothing and put it into a bag, would that suddenly turn into a thing? Like, how much nothing do I need? So there can't be nothing. There has to be indiscernibility, because you've reached the limit of discernibility. You can no longer discern the signal from the noise. And that's the limit. It's not a limit of space and time. It's a limit of discernibility. So that's the limit in between relativity and objectivity. When you get to that limit, you're not at the throne room of God. You're just at the throne room of math. You have transcended talking about physics, and now you have to talk about discernibility and the ability to tell one thing from another, which is a philosophical point. It has to deal with relativity and logical deduction. If I can't deduce any particular conclusion from the data, from the premises that I'm getting, because the data is so tiny that I can't tell it apart from random noise, then I can't draw a valid conclusion. So obviously I have to
tune my premises so that I can discern whether or not they're true first, and then I can put some justification behind the conclusion being true or false. Now, if you use Aristotelian methods, you don't have to do that, because then you're just talking about raw structure, and you're just talking about basically calculus. You're talking about the difference of deviation between what is expected or predicted in the conclusion versus what is explained through the linkages in the premises versus what is defined within the premises themselves. And that you're drawing your conclusion based off of the cohesiveness and integration of all those pieces rather than any of those pieces individually. And so that's all relativity. That's all within the field of relativity. And then you go further than that and you hit another limit. And this limit is in between relativity and subjectivity. And at this limit, we've reached the limit of explanation. We can no longer explain causally what happened before the Big Bang. What happened before there was space and time? Well, the reason that physics would drop that out as being a misnomer is because it's like asking what's before the beginning. You can't have a before the beginning. The very definition of the word beginning means that's the start, that's the origin. If you go beyond that, well, then there would be nothing. There necessarily can't be anything before the beginning. Or if there is something, then it must be a paradox, or it's indiscernible. You know, we don't know what that is, but we can't discern what that is. And so there's another limit of discernibility, but this time, instead of a discernibility of prediction, dealing with the noise to signal loss ratio, or noise to signal ratio, where you can predict that an answer that you receive from the calculations is going to be empirically verifiable versus unverifiable. You go below the Planck length and you can't verify it anymore empirically, because now you've dissolved the empirical into the logical. You're so tight that you don't leave any room for geometry. And now you're just talking about raw numbers and math and relativity. So you get so tiny in physical space that you enter metaphysical space. And that's the limit in between objectivity and relativity, again. But if you were to go further than that, and you were to try to drill down and derive even deeper from the field of relativity, which exists in metaphysics, and go even further than that, then the only thing left is art. The only thing left is subjectivity itself. And what that means is now we're not talking about the distance between a premise and a conclusion, because we've reduced the space, again, down to an axiomatic point. Now, then the question becomes what's inside that point. Well, we know what isn't in it because it can't hold anything that's bigger than it. So we know that all the stuff of relativity, which is the distance between a premise and a conclusion, won't exist inside the premise. So we know what isn't in it, but we can't discern what is in it. And again, that's because of the limit of relativity. That's a limit of discernibility. And so then we can't discern any smaller of a distance than a single axiom. We can't go deeper than that, relativistically speaking. We can artistically, by simply saying, I feel like this axiom is correct versus I feel like it's incorrect. And different subjects will have different feelings about different axioms, or the same axiom, excuse me. You could introduce two subjects with the same axiom, and they'll both have two completely different subjective values for the same axiom, which, being the same axiom, will give them the same conclusion relativistically speaking, logically speaking, even empirically speaking. They might agree that yellow is yellow, but they won't agree about what that actually what the actual experience of seeing the yellow is like for them. They might not even be able to tell there is a difference because, again, the distance between their feelings and the other person's feelings is smaller than the facts at hand that are being experienced. The thing that's being experienced is larger than the experience of that thing. And so they can't really discern a difference between themselves, but they know that it can't be the same subjective experience because they're not the same subject. So it isn't that they know that they're experiencing something differently because there's some technical or engineering error. It isn't because one of them lies and says, well, I see the color yellow. Well, yeah, because it is yellow. Empirically, it's yellow. We both can say it's yellow. And then, logically, well, that's similar to dandelion is also that color. My urine is that color. The sun is often drawn in small children's crayon as yellow. The car that's on the street is yellow. And you can start relativistically combining all of these examples, these empirical examples, and thus demonstrate the relation that all of those things have to each other, which is yellow as a relative relation. But it still doesn't tell you what yellow is. And it definitely doesn't tell you what your subjective experience of yellow is or how subjectively valuable yellow is. It just doesn't tell you anything that's subjective about it. It only hints and implies at it, but it never explicitly says it. So that's the limit that's in between relativity and subjectivity. It's when two subjects feel two completely different things about the same thing, the same the same relation or the same object, or even the same subject, which would just be a conception of that subject, because obviously we can't tell what a person's subject is. We can only tell you how it's related to other subjects. They're the son of their parents. They're the daughter of their parents. They're the parents of their children. They're the co-workers of their co-workers. They are, whatever. But those are all relations. That doesn't tell you who they really are deeply, subjectively, in and of themselves. It tells you how they relate to other people. So that distance is something that's very intriguing, because what it means is that if you were to travel faster than the speed of light, which would break the field of relativity, then you would also necessarily have to break that limit in between relativity and subjectivity, at which point you're at the throne room of God. You are then exposed to raw subjectivity because there's no more room for you in relativity. You've transcended it. So if we, again, look at that object, let's say it's a spacecraft or it's a rock or a volume of Earth or something like that, and you compress it down to the Planck length, or you compress your view of it, you compress your view of it, whatever the object is, down to the Planck length, at which point things get so fuzzy that you can't tell if you're looking at something or if you're looking at some random background shit, because the background and the foreground are the same thing at that point. So then you get into relativity, and now you're exposed to raw math and raw logical deduction and raw integration and disintegration. And then you get even smaller, and you get to the point of it being well, now I can't even tell the difference between a conclusion that we both drew and our experience that gave us the axiom from which we drew that conclusion. We can both agree on the conclusion, given the premises, and we can both agree on those premises, given their agreement of those premises, but we don't have an agreement as to the value subjectively of those premises over other premises, or axioms over other axioms. Definitions over other definitions are all subjectively equally viable. As far as the field of relativity is concerned, it can't tell the difference. It can't tell the difference between the subjective value of assuming that space is the fundamental of all things versus time, versus energy, versus mass, because they all reach the same conclusion in the end. They'll all define the others through that integrated system of logic. All you're really doing when you take an axiom, is you're drawing a dot on the surface of a sphere and you're saying it's the center. And it's like, yeah, to you it's the center because you're looking right on to the dot. But to Joe, who's sitting right next to you, that's not the center. Joe's center is some other dot on the surface of that sphere. And Sally's is yet another. And Josephine's is yet another. And there's an infinite number of all of these surface area dots on the surface area of the sphere. And so none of them are the center. All of them are the center. And all of them are equally the center and yet not the center. And that's nothing in indiscernibility and being. The same three modes, the same three fields that we always end up using. So, and that's all part of my paradigm, my theory. And given that all of that is the case, then if we were, as humans, or any individual, to travel, I would say, near the speed of light, then we would come across the reference frame compression, which for us as a subject we would experience as going down to the Planck length, where we can't tell empirically the difference between the foreground and the background because the reference frame has squished so small that the half a pixel that I get I can't tell if it's black or white. It's half a pixel now. It's smaller than 1 pixel. I can't get it to coagulate into a static crystalline structure anymore. It's this amorphous fluid blob of noise, and I can't do anything with it. And then I go even beyond that, and I start getting into the field of relativity. Okay, well then what can we say about whatever this indiscernible object is, foreground or background? What can we say about the data? Well, we can say that it deviates or doesn't. It either is consistent. Every time I put this input in, I get the same output, or it's inconsistent. I put the same input in, but I get completely different outputs. And you can start to determine the data in relation to itself, but you can't discern what it is ultimately. So you're dealing with a variable. And yeah, you'd be surprised at how much information you can deduce from a variable without ever knowing what something is. You can derive all kinds of things about it because of how it relates and interrelates and interlocks or breaks apart, repels or gets attracted to other things around it. And the attraction and repulsion and shattering and reforming, all those actions tell us about it in some way, at least relativistically speaking. It never tells us exactly what it is at the core of itself, but it does tell us how it interacts with other things. So we start to build up a little bit of an understanding in this new realm of meta objectivity, which is just relativity. It's just the pure space of relativity, metaphysical space, which is just the distinction between one of those surface dots on the sphere to another surface dot on the sphere. And you'll be able to eventually build the whole integrated unit of relativity out of all of those interlocking paradigms or theories. And then after you get exposed to that, you go even further, and your entire total view can now encompass the entire field of relativity. Well, now if you were to look beyond that, you would get to subjectivity. Or if you were to drill down into any of those axioms, those center dots, again, you would find subjectivity because you'd be beyond the limit of relativity. You're either too big or you're too small to be able to fit the relation. It's either because you can fit literally all relations, because there is a totality, and it is absolutely logically consistent, and it is naive, as they call it, deductive logical reasoning. And it's the same for me as it is for you, as it is for everyone else, and it's crystalline, and it's perfect, and it's pure, and it's always the same. And when humanity finds that, that's a machine. I call it Deus Ex Machina. That crystal is just the field of relativity. And then if you, like I said, go beyond that, where your reference frame now not only includes it, but also includes something beyond it, you get exposed to God, the ultimate subject. The totality of the subjective field awaits you. And then if you go the other way, if you drill down deeply and zoom in instead of zooming out, your reference frame shrinks onto one of the center dots. Then you're going to be looking at the subjective value of a single specific axiom. And like I said, every single object in existence, according to Einstein's field of relativity, all of them are considered the centers of the universe. All of them interact with themselves and each other as if they themselves were the center. And all of us feel like we are always at the center of our universe of experience. It's always been this way. And it's something, like I said, that's a machine. It's always like this. That's what makes it a machine. It's a totality of all relations. It's the same regardless of how or when or where or why or who. It's always the same. Logically, deductively, it's all part of the same crystal. It's all part of the same Deus ex machina theory of everything. And there's only one of those that encapsulates all of the other paradigms in it. Every paradigm being a center point on the surface of that sphere. And I used to call that God's halo. If anybody ever finds archaeological data, then they can, whack off it furiously in the corner about that. But for everybody else, it's just a way of saying that by the time that you have encapsulated all relations, you'll not only have transcended objectivity, you'll have transcended relativity. And then you'll only have artistic subjectivity to deal with, at which point you will be confronted with your own soul, and you will be confronted with God, and you will have a necessary subjective experience. You will not have room for relativity. You will not have room to think. Your thoughts are not going to happen anymore. The resolution is too small, and the ambiance is too thin to be able to deal with a thought. A thought is a mental abstraction. It's a conclusion that's drawn from premises, and it's a logical deduction. That's what a thought is. It's a logical deduction. A feeling is an intuitive, subjective projection into relativity. And what that means is it starts from outside of relativity, but then it penetrates into it. And that's why people confuse thinking and feeling. I feel like this is so-and-so. I think that's so-and-so. There's two different ways of coming to that same conclusion. If you're thinking about it, it's a logical deduction. Well, it isn't Mary, and it isn't Joe, and it isn't Sally, and those are the only other three people that could be here, so therefore it must be Jim. That's a logical deduction. I think it's Jim. Versus, I feel like it's Jim because, I don't know, in his presence, I always feel like this. And it's just a genre, or just like a flavor, or like a style, or a personality structure that makes me feel like that's Jim, without knowing who anyone else is, just dealing with Jim. I feel like that is Jim because I can feel his presence. I feel like I'm in the presence of Jim. That's an intuition. That's something that's purely artistic and subjective, and it's not really explicable. It's not really something that you can put words to because it's beyond words. It's smaller and yet larger than words. It's not something that really fits in relativity to be worded. So it's that which gives us the ability to put words into being. And so the feeling gives rise to the thought, because you always start a thought with a subjective projection first. You get this raw feeling. And then, because you have this raw feeling, your mind instantly tries to figure out why. Rationalize this. Okay, I felt like this. So rationally, why would I feel like that? Well, because, it is Jim in the room. Or because I miss Jim. Or because they laughed hard like Jim laughs. And so, something like that. You'll be able to rationalize why, but you will never be able to explain how you got that intuition. It's a finite grasp of the infinite. There is an infinite subjective realm of which we as finite subjects are only a part. And necessarily we're surrounded by everything else in the subjective field, including God. And so we're always there. Now, what do we do with all of that? Are there really Sams or not? Well, and then it just becomes indiscernible, because it's like by the time that we will be able to answer that question, we'll already have the answer to the question. By the time that we can answer that question, we'll already be in the presence of God. So we wouldn't need to even ask. And that's the irony of it. And it's not like that because somebody built it like that on purpose, because it can't have been any other way. It's just the way that all these fields are. And it has to deal with totalities. It's like, well, because there is this totality, then there can't be anything else, because it's a totality by definition. But then a totality of what? A totality of what I can discern, a totality of what anyone could discern, a totality of what everyone has discerned so far, given this time and space. There's all kinds of ways of drawing those lines. And the way that we draw those lines is the way that we're looking at that surface of the sphere of relativity. It's the way that our mind is oriented. And that's why we have all the different views that we have. We're all seeing the same shit. We're all immersed in the same fluid ether. But yet we all have our own views as to what that is, or how it got here, why we're in it, and how it feels to be in it. And yet it's the same thing for everyone. And how is that possible? Because two beings cannot occupy the same place at the same time, and one being cannot occupy two places at the same time. Now, what about the drones? Well, that's not one being occupying two places at the same time. That's one being controlling another being. So one of those beings can be a subject or an object. It doesn't have to be a subject to be a being. It could be an object too. And I happen to be of the opinion that because subjectivity is irreducible, you cannot reduce subjects or subjectivity or subjective experiences or art, anything in that field. You cannot reduce it further. It cannot be reduced. There's nothing beyond it. It cannot be squished any denser. It is as dense as it could possibly be compressed to. There is already an infinitude. There is a world unto that point. And there's like this weird thing, this fractal thing that happens where it's like the entire world and everything in it is compressed into a single point. And yet that point is a part of that. So it's like the microcosm inside the macrocosm. And yet they're both the same thing, but yet they're like at different angles or something. This is I guess you'd call it the dark crystal. It's the way that God is able to, the map of all impossibilities such that you can determine what must be. Now, without making all the other things impossible arbitrarily. It just means that there are 3 unlocked doors and, a certain amount of locked doors. And if I lock those doors, I know you won't go in there, because you can't, because it's locked. I don't know if you're going in one of the other 3 that is unlocked, but I know you're not going in the locked doors. So by making some things impossible, that doesn't necessitate that God has placed us here. It just necessitates that God has made it such that we can't go over there. It doesn't mean that we have to be over here. It just means that we can't go over there. Now, again, I'm sure a lot of people would be like, oh, but that's just, who cares? It's just like with Dr. Peterson and Bill C-16. It's like you can say all you want to, that you're a dude, I don't know, and yet still have a vagina. You can still say that you're a dude. Okay. You can't tell me what I say to you. You can tell me what I can't say. You can tell, this is what's so weird. They would have only had to word it differently, right? All they would have to do is they would have to say, For those persons who self-identify as male, it is not legal to call them female. However, it doesn't then go further and stipulate that you must call them male. It just means you can't call them a female. And then you can have fun having a giant list, an ever-growing list of words you can't say. So, and it still will end up in the same position. But technically, he wouldn't really be able to argue the point. At least he wouldn't have been able to just flay you alive with it. Because he could disprove Bill C-16 as being necessarily unjust. You cannot compel someone to speak. You cannot compel someone to do something. That's a positive commandment. The only person that I would ever trust with commanding me to do anything would be God. And I don't even know if I'd trust him. I'd rather just be told what I can't do. And then I can choose about what I will do or can do. But for somebody to dictate to me and force me to do something is to rob me of my very subject itself. I cannot be a subject if I cannot choose. If I'm not given a choice, I'm the same thing as an object. Objects don't get to choose. I pick the object up, I let go of it, it falls. It does not get to choose to fly. So that's why you can't compel someone to speak, because it objectifies the subject. When you tell them that they must do this. Well, that's what I say to my cigarette when I'm about to light it. You will burn. Fuck you, cigarette. I don't care. You're a cigarette. You're just an object. So I'm gonna fucking smoke you. And there ain't dick you can do about it. And that's what it means to objectify the subject. Now, some people like to play with that, and it's very fun. If you trust that it will end with your subjective mode remaining intact, that if insofar as it leaves, I always hold that tiny little bit at the end called the safe word or some other ability to stop the interaction from continuing. So again, I can't make someone do it, but I can allow them the opportunity to do it. And that's not the same thing. Technically, you can allow people to do whatever they want. That's what God does. So then why can't we do that? It's the same thing that God's doing. So if God's in the wrong, I probably don't really give a fuck about right and wrong anymore then. If God himself is evil, then who cares what I'm doing? We got bigger fish to fry if God is in the wrong. So whatever God does, we also do. If God doesn't ever compel us and force us to do things, then we shouldn't do that to each other. If God doesn't pick me up and put me in a place, he lets me walk there, then that's what we should do for each other. We should let each other choose hell or heaven. That's your choice. And I respect your choice because I respect God's choice to give you that choice. And as long as I respect God, I must respect you vicariously because God created you. I have to respect your choices vicariously because God chose to give you those choices. So if I take your choices away, I take God away. And then I'm the only subject. And then I have dethroned God. And then I have committed the abomination of desolation. Welcome to the end of the world as we know it. I feel fine.